Episode 7. Welcome to the Unnamed Game Code podcast. I am Gilbert. I am the main designer for Unnamed Game Co. We are working on some really fantastically fun things coming up. Today I am going back to some sort of our design stuff and talking about other games and talking about other systems. And I want to talk about PBTA. I know it's been around for a very long time. I know there are very big fans of PBTA. I know there are people who love PBTA, and I will talk about my thoughts on PBTA and how I genuinely feel about it as a design aesthetic. My views on its flaws and its strengths, and as a designer, if I would do a PBTA myself. Again, this is Gilbert for the Unnamed Game Co. and welcome to our podcast. If you like what we do, please hit like and subscribe down below. I think it's down below. It is a wonderful Saturday, hopefully, where you are, and you are listening to this, or you're listening to this day after, whatever it is. I wanted to say, let's get right to it. Let's talk about PBTA. There are a lot of PBTAs out there. PBTA is humongous. It started with the Apocalypse World game, and then the people took the system and then adopted it and hacked it to no end, and we ended up with things like Masks. We ended up with games like Threadbare. We ended up with the offshoots, which I'm not going to talk about today. I'm not planning to talk about Forged. I'm not planning to talk about Outside Belonging Outside or Belonging Outside Belonging. I think it's B-O-B. It's B-O-B. Belonging Outside Belonging. I'm not going to talk about those systems because as good as those systems are, they're sort of an offshoot of PBTA. They sort of developed their own rule sets. They've sort of built their own hacks. They sort of have their own way of doing things, and they're sort of far and away removed from the PBTA world in their own ways that they can't really be called a PBTA. That being said, I am mostly focused on games that are deemed PBTA, like Masks, Apocalypse World, Monster of the Week, a number of games out there that enjoy the system, Passion de las Passions as well. There is some amazing games in the PBTA spirit, and it is one of the things that came out about PBTA that you talk to people about is that they love the notion of failing forward. It is the notion that you fail, but you have the ability to fail and move forward. So, you get a bonus for a failure, or you get an experience point for a failure, or something changes in the world, and it's very like, oh, here we are. I rolled a 7. So it's a 2d6 system. Generally, for 11 and higher, it's considered a super success. Anything from like 8 or I believe 7 to 10 is considered a nominal success, and anything from like 6 and below is considered like a failure, or the failure in terms of what we deem failure in the PBTA world. And it was novel. It came out. It was this notion of like, not really novel, but it was this notion of like, you have these playbooks. There's a very like, you play you play a what do you call it? You play a specific type of character. You play an archetype, and the archetype has certain things that they can do, and amongst those certain special things that they can do, there is a my mind is going blank. So they have these archetypes. They can. And there's certain specific things they can do, and they have sort of specific powers that they can do, and then you have the basic move sets, which is like, I want to attack, I want to conquer, I want to do something that, and then these are the things that everyone can do. So you have, and then you generally will have like 4 or 5 stats depending on the game. the stats will have a +1, +2, -1, 0, or sometimes on occasion a -2, or yeah, -2, -1, +2, -1, -2. It's not always that you see that, but it happens in some games where they're like, yes, you have more +2s, and no, it's and these affect your modifier, and these playbooks are generic enough where there is room to sort of interpret, but not in too much room. So for some people that don't like to, when I've seen this, for some people that don't like to try to narrow their thought process, or try to work within a system, a PBTA struggles for them. I've seen it happen on a number of occasions where someone sees a playbook and says, I don't know what to do because the thing I want to do doesn't really fit in this. And there's people that just go, well, it's technically this. And then they just say, and then you just try to, meld it around. And some people are sitting there trying to plan how they will use the power in the right way. And that for some people is a struggle, because some people just want to do an action and not try to figure out why you have to make it fit this thing. Which is, for me, like, a lot of people have a hard time transitioning out of D&D into PBTA primarily because of that reason. I've seen it more often than not where a player comes from the D&D world and goes into PBTA because PBTA is super popular, because they're like Dungeon World or Monster Hearts or whatever it is, and say, oh, this is really cool, everyone talks about it, and then they look at it and they just go, well, I just want to go pew pew shoot shoot, and this is, well, you have that shoot button. And I was like, okay, cool. And then I have to pick skills, and you have to pick specialties, and you're like, okay, how do I level up? And some people get really flustered. And some people are just not built for PBTA, because PBTA for some people feels narrow. And it's a bad thing. I'm not trying to say like, oh, you're wrong. Like, no, some people do genuinely feel like there is a narrow scope from PBTA, and it just depends on how it's written. But a lot of times it feels like, okay, I don't know if my action fits, and oh, it doesn't really fit. Does it really fit your, what you do, what your archetype is? And so for some characters like who want to be able to do whatever they want to do, a PBTA can be tough because you don't know how to interpret an action to fit the thing you wanted to do in the game. But for the most part, most people like PBTAs. There's tons of them out there. In fact, some PBTAs are extremely more popular than the original Apocalypse World. There are people who live and die by the sort of masks, and there are people who live and die by Monster of the Week, and that's 100% legit. It's 100% legit that's your game. Like, that's fine. I'm not here to discuss whether or not PBTA is good or bad. I'm not here to discuss whether it's a valid system or not. I am just sort of discussing my perspectives of what I feel towards PBTA and my overall feeling towards it, just to get it out of the way here, almost 8 minutes into this podcast, is that I'm not a huge fan. And my reason is different than most people, because people are like, why aren't you love PBTA? And my reason is it lacks immersion. I love PBTA because it's very user friendly. It's very good for like a new player that's kind of scared to like do a lot, where they're just like, I just want to know what I can do. And it's really great if your like starting system is a PBTA game. It is one of the best systems you can do, because you're not used to doing things or going off the rails or doing whatever the hell you please. Like, if you're coming into a PBTA for the first time, here's moves. And you pick the move you like the most, whichever sounds cool. Oh, man. And sometimes it's really nice because the game designers will put the moves that they think work best for the playbook, or much more the most interesting stuff, at the very top of the play sheet, which makes life easy. So you start on a playbook, you go through and then you go, okay, I want this and this, I want this power and this power, and then I want this equipment and this equipment, and I want to, and then this one says I can take +1 in weird, and I can take +0 in strength. Okay, cool, and then I'll put all those stats in, and I'm done. It's easy, and you base your decisions on the playbook. And if you're a novice player, it is the best system to start with. If anybody ever asks me, what do I recommend to start on? Like, what is the game I recommend they start with? I never say D&D. I never say like Lasers and Feelings. I never say those games, because I think you need to have a game that's meaty enough for someone to feel. So you need a game that has some meat and breath to it. You can't just be like, well, give them a freeform in light game. Isn't that what you want? No, you don't want that. New players are not necessarily built to be creative. They don't have the notion to be like, I can just come up with whatever I feel like. It doesn't work like that in most tables. There are, and then some you're going to be like, some people always tell me, oh, but, that's not everyone. I'm like, I'm not saying everyone. There's people that just come into TTRPG and this just flows naturally. They come from a theater background, or they just know they're just very sociable people, and that is cool. But the majority of people don't have this sort of like creative license to just make whatever up. Have you been on a DTRPG or D&D table with a new player that just sits there and doesn't know what to say and is lost the entire time? It's because they're given too many choices and they're just trying to figure out what they can do. That is the biggest problem. It's not like I know how to roll a die, I just don't know what my character can do. And so that's why PBTA is really good for starting players. If you have too many mechanics, people just feel overwhelmed. There's too many things that they have to remember. You have to remember DC saves. You have to remember, have to know how to strength checks, and you have to do this, and you can't, if you're too loose, then there's not enough mechanics. So it's like, okay, there's just too free form. I can just do whatever I want. And there are people that do one well with one and do well with the other. The problem is that they're so that it's hard to tell what type of player someone is until like they start playing. And so very logical people like love D&D because there's a sense of like there's numbers and you just kind of go with the numbers, and the numbers tell you what to do, and the numbers and you roll and you add numbers and you're good. Some people don't like that. Some people want to be creative and they want to just say like, I jump on the motorcycle, cool, roll a d6. I rolled a 5. You got it. You succeeded. You ride the motorcycle. Okay, cool. And then there's games that are just way too complicated. That are like you got to roll the d6, and then you got to roll a hold check, and then you got to roll a this check, and you got to roll a that check, and that is way too much for players. PBTA, and I will fight on this, is great for new players. It's great. It's amazing for new players. It is fundamentally the best system to start with for new players. If you want to introduce someone to the hobby TTRPG, if you are willing to roll them PBTA. I come from I was an experienced person when I first hit PBTA, and I can tell you I hated it because I just was like, I hate following rules. I almost cussed. I almost did. I hate just being expected to follow these parameters. So, but I can't. I want to do something with like a lava kick. Oh, that's not something like a fire person does. But you don't have that skill. And there's GMs who adjust and they're like, just roll 2d6 and I'll tell you if you succeed, and that's cool. I've seen that happen. But there are some GMs that don't know how to, don't feel comfortable stepping outside of the playbook, because the notion is that the playbook is supposed to guide your thoughts and your process and your play. And so you're very outside of yourself making decisions. And this is fundamentally why I don't necessarily enjoy the follow-up systems in the PBTA cycles. I just don't enjoy the notion of we are more planning outside of our, planning outside of the character instead of just playing the character. There's so much thought process into making sure that, we're doing the moves right and we're nailing things and we're sort of and it's a great system to start with, but I don't think it's a great system to like. I don't. It also, I just don't think it just gives the immersion. It just makes you. For me, that's just me, and I know that some people are gonna say, no, it's really immersive. You can totally. No, it's not. I just don't. And Mass is really good. Like, it's a good immersive game, but really, like, to be frank with you, like, the people who like really enjoy the immersion things, like, oh, it's really immersive. Like, you're really into RP. And some people sit there and go, I'm really into RP, but the game isn't making you into making RP happen. You're just into RP. You're just into the role-playing aspect of it. You could play superhero teenagers and get those character dimensions and depth without having most of the system around you. That's a fact. And that's my issue, is that you can't, that the people who generally defend PBTA and say that it's really great are just RPers, and they like free flow systems, and they create the experiences for themselves, but not necessarily the game creates a system, creates that for them. It's a great system, and then there's things like there's things built in that make RP interesting. There are relationship questions you ask, because that's something that PBTA is really into, is like building a relationship with all the other characters. And then there's, having flaws and foibles, and when you make failures, you have to clear it in some way. And there's those things which are great. Don't get me wrong. So there isn't fully, like, not entirely things that you have to do in order to RP and create the game. You have to play the character. But a lot of those are premeditated thought process things you have to do. Like, you have to consciously take a failure or take a thing to try to clear your I don't know, angst or whatever stat that's going to be. Or health, or you have to regain health by doing this thing. Or you have to give into your troubles, or whatever it is. And that, for me, it's like you're playing a game, not an RP game. Yep, that's why I'm not a fan of, like, that's why what I think about PBTA. I think you're more playing the game of PBTA, not necessarily the TTRPG of PBTA. And we're so much more outside of ourselves, and we're so much more trying to make plans that it's for a certain type of player, and it's just not me. And I don't like to design that way. I like to have mechanics and RP sort of play into each other, and I want you to be able to do something, and then we figure out in our own way how to make those things to determine the success and failures. I think if you want to make PBTA, I think if you like PBTA, you should totally play it. But I think it's best for a beginner. And there's I've played in a number of PBTA games. I can tell you that I've sat there in a lot of game sessions, and there's a lot of RP going back and forth, but a lot of it's not created necessarily because of the RPG or the system. They're just people who like RPG and like role playing, and they just find a niche in it, and it just works. They enjoy the sort of the free form aspect of it, because there's not a to B to C to D thing. It's just here's a playbook, I'm playing the playbook the way I want to play it, and it's just exploring the world around you with a shell to cover you. That's how I look at the Powered by the Apocalypse system. And would I design a PBTA? The answer is I don't know. I have thought about that a number of occasions, and I have actually started designing a PBTA, and I was designing a Filipino game, but I struggle with designing a PBTA just as much as I struggle playing a PBTA. I love the system. I love it. I love the system as like the ideas behind it, like just some of the way that it looks and the feels, and I like the creativity. Like, I mean, I don't okay, clarify. I'm saying I love it as like a designer looking at it as like construction. It looks really cool. Like, you have these playbooks and you get to design playbooks and you get to, and I think the playbook thing, really stems from this PBTA world, and where people are now doing more playbooks and more like, and maybe it's, it's been around for a while, but the notion that the playbook is really like, is really where the generation, where things are generated from. It's not pick a class, pick a race. So you pick a playbook, and the playbook dictates everything else. Like, I want to play the spindly soldier. Okay, cool. And it's focused primarily on creating a spindly soldier, and it gives you a parameter and a dictation, and it gets you to the thing you want to do, and it's really cool. And as a designer, that's really cool. Like, you can make these things, but for me as a player, I don't. I want to play a spindly soldier, but I want to play spindly soldier with some dynamics. Maybe my spindly soldier is gonna be like, sad. What is the word spindly? Am I even making up a word here? See, I'm just using a word, and I'm like, okay, maybe it's not even a word. I'm looking this up. Hold on, people. Spindly. If I'm saying something completely wrong, I'll have to turn this thing off and discover long or tall and thin. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. That's what it meant. A spindly soldier, a long, tall, thin soldier, and maybe that's the thing. Is like that's what. Maybe that's what you like, and you can play in those parameters, and you can stay within the confines, and that's something that works for you. But PBTA for me is you're playing more the game of it, not the RPG of it. And that's something that frustrates me, because it looks like we're all just sort of planning, and it's very much like we are you're very centric on we are players playing a game. We are players playing a playbook in this game, and it really hits home that notion of like immersion. I really don't like games that take us away from immersion, because I think immersion is necessary for TTRPG. Fight me. And it also, it's primarily why I know I said I wasn't going to go into it, but this is like primarily why I'm not a big fan of the Forge either, because it's more game. It's more play the table, more play the map, more play the system than it is the TTRPG aspect. It's more of it. And it's like, oh, this is 10 times worse. But for designers, these are things that people love, because they like to, they are able to create more depth of their world through the playbook. Because it used to just be that the characters were completely and utterly owned by the players. Like, this is you can make a character and you can design it however you want it to be, and the GM has to make it fit into his world, or their world. And in PBTA, it's like, well, these types of characters now fit into your world, and now you're like, okay, so now we have to try to form fit an archetype, which is so much easier to like ingratiate it in and shoehorn it in than it is to do other things. And for some people, Godspeed, that's what you like to do. And yeah, there's a lot of designers out there that are very like, I want to build a world, and I'm a world builder. And since I'm not, I mean, it's very clear, I'm not a big world builder type of person. It trying to create archetypes in my world, in a game for my world, it takes it away from the immersion. And that doesn't mean I don't use playbooks. I use playbooks in Star Fury, other games, or Falling Star, Star Fury. But for me, a playbook is playbooks. I use playbooks differently in that I don't use moves in playbooks. A playbook for me is like more of a, here's an archetype, this is what the archetype covers, but you're free to do what you want to do. And so, as a designer, I think PBTA looks really cool. I would love to design PBTA if I could, but as a player, I'm just not a fan. So it feels inauthentic and weird to say that I wouldn't mind designing something, but I wouldn't want to really play it. And that's because, there's something unique about building a PBTA and building all the moves and all this stuff, and then building a world around it. And it's really cool. But also, as a player, it's just not my thing. I know I rambled a lot and I stuttered a lot in this one, but I hope you all enjoyed this episode. And I will see you at the next one. Take care. Oh, and if you like what we're doing, hit like and subscribe. Have a good day.